Picture this. It's 2035, and you're walking through what used to be the industrial heartland of Europe. The sprawling factories that once powered the global economy now stand empty. Their windows dark, machinery cold. The wind whistles through broken glass where the sounds of precision manufacturing once echoed. This isn't some sci-fi nightmare. It's a very real mathematical endpoint we're getting closer to every single day. We're watching the slow-motion collapse of one of the world's greatest industrial powerhouses, and most people don't even realize it's happening. For decades, German engineering was the gold standard. These were the people who gave us precision so perfect it made Swiss watches look like amateur hour. But right now, a perfect storm of disasters is turning these masters of manufacturing into museum pieces. And if you think this doesn't affect you, think again. Because when Europe's economic engine seizes up, the shockwaves don't stop at the German border. They ripple through every major market on the planet. Before we start cutting into this patient on the table, take a second to subscribe so you don't sleepwalk into the same kind of structural decline in your own portfolio or career. The stories we break down here aren't just about Germany. They're about patterns you can spot early before they crush you. The official story you'll hear from politicians and business leaders is that Germany is just going through a rough patch. They'll blame temporary supply chain issues or maybe some short-term energy price volatility. The media repeats the same comforting script. German quality will always win out. Their engineering expertise is unmatched, and everything will bounce back once this unusual period is over. What keeps the average person calm while the ship is taking on water is one simple belief: that superior craftsmanship automatically equals long-term success. They think that because BMW makes a better engine than Tesla, or Siemens builds more reliable machinery than some Chinese competitor, the universe will eventually reward that quality. It's the economic equivalent of believing the best team always wins the championship just because they deserve it. The reality is far more brutal. We're not looking at a temporary downturn. We're watching a structural breakdown wired into the very foundations of how German industry operates. The incentives that made Germany great are now the same forces quietly destroying it from within. Let me walk you through how this disaster was engineered, step by step. First, there's what I'd call the panel gap obsession. There's a German word, Spaltmaß, that perfectly captures why their entire automotive industry is now staring into the abyss. It means the distance between body panels on a car, like where the door meets the frame. For half a century, German engineers have been almost religiously obsessed with making these gaps smaller and more consistent. They've spent billions of euros and millions of man-hours ensuring the gap between your hood and fender is perfect to the micrometer. When you sat in an Audi in 2010, it felt like a bank vault. Dense, solid, worth every penny. Those panel gaps were the visual signature of superiority, broadcasting that the Germans cared more than anyone else about precision. But while German engineers were measuring door hinges with micrometers, Silicon Valley and Shenzhen were quietly rewriting what a car actually is. Germans still see a car as a combustion engine with seats attached. The market now sees a car as a rolling computer, a smartphone on wheels. The Volkswagen Cariad mess is the perfect example. A few years ago, Volkswagen realized Tesla wasn't winning because of bodywork. It was winning because the software actually worked. So VW did what Germans love to do. They threw money, org charts, and committees at the problem. They created a giant software division called Cariad, hired thousands of programmers, and set out to build an operating system to rival Tesla and Google. The result was a slow-motion humiliation. When they launched the ID.3, their big electric hope, thousands of cars rolled off assembly lines in Zwickau, but couldn't be delivered. Mechanically, they were fine. The panel gaps were beautiful. But the software simply didn't work. They were literally building very expensive bricks. Flawless hardware with a useless brain. VW ended up renting huge parking lots just to store all these undeliverable cars, while technicians with laptops walked through the rain manually flashing firmware one vehicle at a time because their over-the-air update system wasn't ready. Imagine Apple selling you an iPhone and then sending a technician to your house with a USB stick to install iOS in your kitchen. That's the level of digital backwardness we're talking about. It comes from a deep culture clash. German engineering is built on hierarchy and perfectionism. You plan for 5 years, measure twice, cut once, and only ship when it's as close to perfect as humanly possible. Software development is the opposite. Ship early, break things, patch constantly. To a traditional German engineer, releasing beta software feels like moral failure. Meanwhile, Chinese manufacturers like BYD and NIO are stuffing massive touchscreens, AI assistants, and seamless connectivity into cars that cost half as much. The skill set that made German engineers valuable, mechanical perfection, is becoming a commodity. Most buyers don't care if the door gap is perfect if the infotainment system freezes every time they try to change songs. Second disaster, energy suicide. If you run a factory, you need 3 basic inputs: raw materials, labor, and energy. If anyone becomes too expensive or unreliable, the whole model breaks. For roughly 20 years, the German miracle ran on a fragile equation: high-tech exports powered by cheap Russian gas. Germany built pipelines straight from Russia, bypassing geopolitics as if history had ended. That cheap gas-powered companies like BASF, ThyssenKrupp, and Bayer, letting them run enormous chemical and steel operations competitively despite very high German wages and heavy regulation. Then came February 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine, pipelines got shut down or blown up, and the German business model evaporated almost overnight. Take BASF, the world's largest chemical producer. Their Ludwigshafen site supposedly consumes as much energy as an entire small country. When gas prices spiked, their energy costs didn't just increase, they went vertical. What does a rational company do? It leaves. BASF is permanently shrinking its European footprint, cutting jobs, shutting ammonia plants, and redirecting new investment to China. They're pouring billions into a giant complex in Zhanjiang. When your chemical base relocates, it's not just one company leaving. It's the foundation under plastics, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, car parts, and half your industrial ecosystem. Entire supply chains start to follow. And in the middle of that crisis, Germany shut down its last 3 nuclear plants. While France doubles down on reactors and the U.S. experiments with small modular designs, Germany turned off reliable carbon-free baseload power because of political trauma dating back to the 1980s. Now German manufacturers face electricity prices multiple times higher than their competitors in Texas or coastal China. Imagine you make specialized ball bearings and compete with a plant in Ohio. His monthly energy bill is $10,000. Yours is $35,000 for the same output. It doesn't matter how brilliant your engineering is or how perfectly balanced your bearings are. The math kills you. That's deindustrialization in real time. New production facilities going to South Carolina, Eastern Europe, or Asia instead of Baden-Württemberg. Third crisis, the demographic cliff. Meet Hans. He's a 58-year-old senior mechanical engineer at a medium-sized German supplier. He can glance at a hydraulic pump schematic and instantly spot failure points. He carries 40 years of tribal knowledge. The supplier they dropped in 1998. The quirk of that old milling machine in Hall 3. The unofficial workarounds that keep the production line running. In 5 years, Hans retires. There is no second Hans. Germany is staring at a demographic hole big enough to swallow its entire industrial base. Industry groups already warn about a huge shortage of engineers, and by the end of this decade, several million skilled workers across all sectors will have aged out of the workforce. Why not just hire young graduates? Because there aren't enough of them, and many of the ones who exist don't want these jobs. Germany has one of the lowest birth rates in the developed world. The young people born 25 years ago aren't all lining up to be mechanical engineers like their grandfathers. They want to work in software, finance, media, or move abroad where their skills pay more. Look at the incentives. A top engineer at BMW might make somewhere in the high five-figure to low six-figure euro range. After taxes and social contributions, the take-home is not exactly lavish. The same engineer can move to the U.S., join a chip company or high-growth tech firm, and earn multiples of that with stock options and lower effective taxes. If you're in your 20s and very smart, why stay and fight uphill when there are easier hills elsewhere? The result is a hollowing out of competence. Walk through a German engineering firm today, and you'll see lots of gray hair in the senior offices. But look at the junior ranks, either thinly staffed or occupied by people without real mentorship, because the mentors are too overloaded keeping the old systems from collapsing. When Hans leaves, he doesn't just free up a job slot. He takes 4 decades of context with him. That's not something you upload to a knowledge base. German engineering superiority was never just about technical standards. It was about apprenticeship culture, long careers, and shared know-how. That chain is snapping link by link. Fourth disaster, death by paperwork. If you think I'm exaggerating about outdated systems, remember how many German health departments were still using fax machines to report infection data during the pandemic. In the 3rd decade of the 21st century, the country that invented the car and the MP3 was printing spreadsheets and feeding them into thermal fax rollers to send critical data to Berlin. This bureaucratic mentality smothers innovation. When Tesla decided to build a gigafactory near Berlin, the idea on paper sounded perfect. American EV disruption meets German engineering excellence. In reality, it became a case study in red tape. The factory was delayed not by some massive engineering failure, but by planning processes, environmental objections, and lengthy hearings about everything from water usage to the habitat of specific lizards and ants. Multi-billion euro investments sat in limbo while committees debated paint fumes for a building that didn't yet exist. In Shanghai, Tesla went from empty field to producing cars in under a year. In Germany, they spent a similar time frame just wrestling paperwork. This feeds a culture of risk aversion. Why start something new if getting permits is a nightmare? Why launch a hardware startup if a single failed project can haunt your credit record for life? In Silicon Valley, failing 2 or 3 times and trying again can actually increase your status. In Germany, bankruptcy is often a permanent scar. So engineers play it safe, refining diesel engines yet again instead of building the next energy system. Fifth, and maybe most terrifying disaster, China 2.0. For decades, the relationship was simple: master and apprentice. Volkswagen went into China in the 1980s, set up joint ventures, and effectively trained Chinese manufacturers. Germans provided the know-how, China provided cheap labor and a huge market. Many German executives convinced themselves this would never really threaten them. Then came the Shanghai Auto Show, turning into Germany's Sputnik moment. German auto executives flew in, walked the floor, and saw something they weren't psychologically prepared for. BYD, NIO, Xpeng, Zeekr. These weren't toy cars anymore. They were attractive, technologically sophisticated EVs with smooth software and aggressive pricing, often undercutting equivalent German models by 30%. There are stories of Volkswagen managers sitting inside Chinese EVs, playing with the infotainment systems, and quietly swearing when they realized their companies had fallen behind. BYD, Build Your Dreams, now controls huge chunks of its supply chain. Mining, batteries, chips, vehicles, even the giant ships carrying those cars to Europe. It's vertical integration on a scale that makes German supply chains look fragile and slow. Today, ships packed with Chinese EVs dock in European ports while German plants idle or cut shifts. The response from Europe is tariffs and political pressure. But tariffs don't magically make your product better or your cost base lower. They just delay the inevitable and irritate your trading partners. If your car is more expensive and less advanced, a customs duty isn't a long-term business model. The final psychological disaster is the Kodak moment. Kodak invented the digital camera and then buried it because it threatened their film business. They were the best in the world at the old game, which made them blind and hostile to the new one. Germany is living a national version of that. When you're the global champion in mechanical engineering, the last thing you want to admit is that the next era may belong to software, AI, and energy pragmatism instead. That's the innovator's dilemma. Your excellence in yesterday's paradigm traps you when the paradigm shifts. For years, German executives mocked Tesla as a hype bubble and dismissed Chinese EVs as cheap knockoffs. That arrogance delayed adaptation until the gap became a chasm. Layer on top of this the not invented here mentality. Solutions that come from California or Shenzhen are treated with suspicion. And then there's the data issue. Germany treats data privacy like a state religion. The GDPR may be their most influential export of the last decade. But while everyone else feeds data into AI systems and builds powerful models, German companies sit in compliance meetings trying not to get sued. You cannot build world-class AI if you're terrified of touching data. In a world where competitive advantage increasingly comes from algorithms learning from huge datasets, Germany is building the safest, most carefully regulated digital graveyard you've ever seen. In the age of software and AI, being perfect but late is just another way of saying obsolete. So what does all this mean for normal people living inside this story instead of watching it on a chart? Before all these compounding crises, a skilled German engineer could expect stable employment, good benefits, and social respect. Engineering was a solid middle-class ticket. Suppliers in the famous Mittelstand ecosystem thrived by making specialized components for global giants. After the shift, those same engineers are facing factory closures, offshoring, or being told they now need to magically become software experts halfway through their careers. Younger Germans increasingly look at traditional engineering roles and see capped pay, high taxes, and shaky job security. Many aim for tech, consulting, or simply move abroad. Small suppliers watch key customers move production to cheaper regions and are forced into tough choices: shrink, sell, relocate, or die. For retirees, this translates into pressure on pension systems that were built on the assumption of a large, productive industrial base. When manufacturing jobs vanish or leave, the tax base erodes. That strains the social model Germany has sold to itself for decades. Housing markets in aging industrial regions stagnate as young people leave. The tight social fabric woven around steady manufacturing work begins to fray. And beneath the economics, there's a deeper identity crisis. For generations, Germans took pride in being the people who built things that worked, that lasted. German engineering was not just a marketing slogan, it was a national self-image. As the economy shifts towards services, software, and financial engineering, a lot of people feel like the ground under their feet is turning into sand. Looking ahead, there are several paths. In the optimistic scenario, Germany successfully pivots. It accepts that mass manufacturing has moved and doubles down on design, research, automation, and high-end niche products. Think less factory of the world and more brains of the operation. In a darker scenario, Germany becomes a kind of comfortable museum economy, still wealthy on paper, but slowly sliding into irrelevance, living off legacy companies, tourism, and past reputation, while real innovation happens elsewhere. Young talent continues to leave, demographics worsen, and the country turns into Europe's politely aging uncle. In the worst case, prolonged economic decline feeds political extremes, protectionism, and social unrest. History has already shown us what happens when a humiliated, economically stressed Germany turns inward and angry. No one sane wants a rerun of that. The most realistic future might be a messy blend. Germany remains a rich, stable country, but loses its role as a defining industrial superpower. Like Britain after World War II, it becomes a former empire adjusting, sometimes gracefully and sometimes not, to a smaller role. Your mental framework for this is simple. Follow incentives and capital flows, not speeches and nostalgia. Demographics, energy prices, and technology trends don't care how many times someone says, "made in Germany" with pride. Always ask, who's actually investing, where, and with what long-term cost base? Who pays for the promises, and when does the bill come due? And then apply that logic to your own life. Don't get trapped in your personal version of the innovator's dilemma. The skills that made you valuable yesterday might be the thing that holds you back tomorrow. In a world shifting from mechanics to code, from cheap energy to energy shocks, from stable demographics to shrinking workforces, adaptability is worth more than any single degree. The tragedy of German engineers is that they did almost everything right according to the old rulebook. Minimized tolerances, maximized efficiency, respected procedures. But they optimized themselves for a world that no longer exists. The danger for the rest of us is copying that mistake at a personal level. Hyper-specializing in one stable system, then refusing to evolve when the system changes. The German industrial unraveling is a preview of what happens when entire economies cling to past advantages, overregulate themselves, and misread their dependencies. It's a cautionary tale about complacency, about trusting cheap energy from unreliable partners, and about believing your golden era can last forever just because it deserves to. No empire, no currency, no brand of engineering has ever been exempt from decline. If this breakdown of an industrial giant's slow-motion fall gave you a clearer picture of how fast economic ground can shift, don't just nod and move on. Subscribe so you're not the last one to notice when the next pillar of the global economy starts to crack. These tectonic shifts are accelerating, not slowing down, and the next too big to fail story might be a country, sector, or career path you're currently betting your future on.